Have you ever considered that real intelligence often reveals itself through silence, not speech? What if the smartest men don't just know what to say, but more importantly, what to never say? Could it be that your greatest strength lies not in adding more words, but in subtracting the wrong ones? In a world obsessed with talking louder and faster, true wisdom lies in a different art, the art of restraint. Guided by the enduring principles of Stoic philosophy and real-world experience, today we uncover 7 things intelligent men never say. Master these, and you won't just sound wise. You'll become the kind of man who commands deep respect in every room you enter. Welcome to Stoic Training. I'm glad you're here because today's conversation might just change the way you see yourself and how others see you. Here's the thing. Truly intelligent men have a secret. It's not about having all the answers or knowing the capital of every country. Their real power lies in knowing when to keep their mouths shut. Sometimes what you don't say says more about you than any clever quote ever could. I've spent years studying people, both through the lens of ancient Stoic wisdom and by sipping too many coffees while watching human nature unfold in real time. Let me tell you, the wisest men I've known share a common trait. They don't waste words, they don't rush to fill silence, and they never say things that undermine their credibility. Today we're diving into 7 things intelligent men never say. Not because they're flawless, but because they've learned, often the hard way, that these phrases lead nowhere good. Stick around, hit that subscribe button, and let's get wiser together. 1. I already know that. There's a phrase that slips out more often than we'd like to admit. I already know that. It sounds harmless, even confident, but what it really reveals is something far less flattering, a closed mind. An intelligent man knows better. He understands that the moment we convince ourselves there's nothing more to learn, we've slammed the door on growth. I learned this the hard way years ago. I was working with a mentor, a man who carried himself with the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through enough battles to speak sparingly. We were reviewing a process I had done 100 times before. He began explaining something about it, and without thinking, I cut him off with, "Yeah, I know that already." He gave me a calm but heavy look and moved on. Later that evening, I realized what I had done. Not just interrupted him, but robbed myself of the chance to hear what he saw that I didn't. His years of experience had taught him things that didn't come printed in manuals or outlined in training videos. Things I hadn't lived long enough to understand. When we say, "I already know that," what we're really saying is, "I have nothing left to learn." That's not intelligence. That's arrogance dressed in the costume of competence. Stoic philosophy cuts right through that illusion. Marcus Aurelius warned us plainly, "You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything." What he meant was that our ego, the need to seem knowledgeable, to protect the image we've built, becomes the very thing that blocks our growth. It convinces us we're standing on solid ground when we're really balancing on pride. Intelligent men understand that knowledge is not a trophy you win and place on a shelf. It's a river, always moving, always changing. You step into the same place twice, and the water's different each time. I once watched a seasoned carpenter listen patiently to an apprentice explaining a technique he had likely mastered decades before. He nodded, asked questions, even thanked him for sharing. Later, I asked him why he didn't just tell the kid he knew all that already. He smiled and said, "Because sometimes you learn more by listening to the way someone else sees it." That's wisdom. And it's the kind of intelligence that doesn't need to broadcast itself. So if you catch yourself thinking, "I've heard this before," take a breath. Listen anyway, not because you need to humor someone, but because you might catch something new, a detail, a shift in perspective, a nuance that deepens your understanding. And even if you don't, you practice humility, you show respect, and over time, that makes you someone worth listening to. In Stoicism, we call that mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride in favor of clarity and the strength to be a student of life always. And in the end, that's the kind of intelligence that outlasts all the rest. 3 dots. That's impossible. Several years ago, I worked alongside a man named Robert. He was sharp, experienced, and the kind of leader who appeared capable of carrying the entire company on his shoulders without ever showing strain. But there was one phrase he used frequently, almost reflexively. That's impossible. Anytime a new idea surfaced, whether a proposal to enter a different market, streamline an outdated system, or approach a difficult client, he dismissed it swiftly with those two words. Initially, it sounded practical and responsible. After all, who has time to waste chasing pipe dreams? However, over time, something painfully clear emerged. Every time Robert said, "That's impossible," he wasn't actually describing the situation itself. He was describing himself, his own limitations and fears. Stoics understood this form of thinking clearly. Seneca famously wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And that's exactly what Robert was doing. He wasn't objectively analyzing the situations. He was projecting his own fear of failure onto them. It was fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong, and fear of trying and falling short. It's a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't look like fear at all. It wears the mask of logic, caution, and practicality. Yet underneath lies the very thing that keeps us small. The belief that if we can't see the entire path, we shouldn't take the first step. Stoic philosophy dismantles this paralysis by reminding us that the obstacle itself isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. I've seen this firsthand. Years after working with Robert, I was part of a challenging project. The budget was tight, the timeline shorter than seemed reasonable, and the team inexperienced. Every logical bone in my body told me it couldn't be done. But instead of saying, "That's impossible," I chose to ask myself, what can I control today? What's the next small step I can take? That project turned out to be one of the most successful I've ever worked on. Not because we performed miracles, but because we refused to be paralyzed by the enormity of the challenge. We stayed focused, tackling one small step at a time. Marcus Aurelius stated clearly, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." This became our difference. When a man says, "That's impossible," he declares defeat before the fight begins. Intelligent men know that what feels impossible often is simply unfamiliar terrain. It's not a wall, it's a challenge to step forward. They understand true strength isn't built by winning every battle, but by showing up again and again, especially when odds seem stacked against them. That's the essence of Stoic courage. Not reckless optimism, but disciplined persistence. In life, we're often asked to do difficult things. The moment we label them impossible, we close the door on our own potential. But the man who learns to take the next step, no matter how small, opens doors that no one else even sees. That's not just intelligence, it's wisdom forged in effort. 3 dots. That's not my fault. One of the most damaging sentences a man can utter is, "That's not my fault." It's deceptively simple and often feels justified when things go wrong, at work, in relationships, or life in general. It's natural to want to defend ourselves, to clarify that blame belongs elsewhere. But here's the truth. Every time we push responsibility away, we also hand over our power. Intelligent men understand this deeply. They've learned that responsibility isn't about blame, it's about influence. If you refuse to take responsibility, even for a small part of the problem, you surrender your chance to be part of the solution. Years ago, my friend Michael lost a major client. Immediately, he began explaining why it wasn't his fault. The client was difficult, the market was shifting, his team missed deadlines. All true to some degree. Yet while he was busy deflecting blame, he missed the chance to learn from the experience. Michael stayed stuck, repeating the same mistakes, convinced it was always someone else's problem to solve. What he didn't realize was this: by refusing to accept any responsibility, he gave up the one thing that could have changed the outcome: control over himself. The Stoics believed we should focus on what is within our control and release the rest. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This is crucial. When we say, "That's not my fault," we place the power to change the situation in someone else's hands. We wait for them to fix it, to make amends, to improve. But when we accept even a small piece of responsibility, we immediately reclaim control, shifting from passive to active, from powerless to powerful. In my own life, I've found that owning my part, no matter how small, opens doors I hadn't noticed before. It might be as simple as admitting I didn't communicate clearly, or acknowledging I could have prepared better, even if others made larger mistakes. This willingness to take responsibility creates an internal shift. It builds trust, both with myself and those around me. It demonstrates that I'm someone who doesn't wait to be rescued or vindicated. I take action. Blame is easy. Responsibility is hard. Yet responsibility is precisely where strength resides. Stoics remind us we're not here to escape difficulty, but to rise above it. Rising begins by asking ourselves, what can I do differently next time? That's how intelligent men lead, not by finding fault, but by finding a way forward. If these insights resonate with you, comment yes below. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear from you. 4 dots. I don't need any help. One of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself is, I don't need any help. On the surface, it sounds noble, independent, strong. It's a phrase we've been conditioned to admire, especially in a culture that often celebrates the lone wolf, the self-made man who carries his burdens without complaint. But beneath this lie is something far less heroic: pride, quiet, corrosive, and isolating. Refusing to ask for help isn't a reflection of strength, but a sign of pride. Over time, this pride isolates us. It convinces us that struggling silently is virtuous, gradually eroding the resilience we think we're protecting. I was reminded of this when reading about Abraham Lincoln during the darkest days of the American Civil War. History often portrays Lincoln as a solitary, stoic figure, carrying the heavy weight of a fractured nation. Yet what's frequently overlooked is how deeply Lincoln relied on others. He surrounded himself with advisors who challenged him. He deliberately sought opinions that contradicted his own, not because he lacked confidence, but because he understood that wisdom isn't born from isolation. Wisdom is shaped by having the courage to admit you don't have all the answers. During the brutal conflict at Antietam, Lincoln famously visited General McClellan, despite their disagreements, seeking strategic insights. He spent countless hours with his cabinet, often referred to as the team of rivals, because he valued perspectives that clashed with his own. This wasn't weakness, it was strength, measured by humility. That's the lesson intelligent men eventually learn. Self-reliance matters, but it was never meant to be absolute. The Stoics were clear about this. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man of his time, openly wrote about the debt he owed to his mentors, teachers, and friends. In Meditations, he cataloged lessons learned from each, openly acknowledging how their wisdom shaped his own. If the most powerful emperor in the world didn't pretend to have all the answers, why should we? Yet many of us still do. We mistakenly believe asking for help signifies defeat or weakness, but that belief is a trap. It keeps us locked inside our own heads, drowning in problems we were never meant to face alone. Worse still, it robs the people around us of the chance to offer their strengths. I've fallen into this trap myself. There was a time I believed I had to carry everything: work, family, the endless pressures to maintain an image of strength. Keeping it together meant keeping it to myself, but all it did was wear me down. The turning point came when I finally admitted to someone I trusted that I couldn't do it alone. Instead of judgment, I found understanding and support. That small moment of humility provided me with clarity and energy I'd been missing for years. I realized true strength isn't about how long you can stand alone. It's knowing when to reach out and accept help. The Stoics remind us we're part of a larger whole. We're made for cooperation, for mutual aid. Epictetus clearly stated, "No man is an island." When we pretend otherwise, we fight the natural order of life itself. Strength is not diminished by asking for help. It's defined by it. Asking for help requires courage and honesty, hallmarks of intelligent, wise men who understand that carrying burdens alone isn't noble, it's unnecessary. So next time you feel tempted to say, "I've got this, I don't need anyone," pause. Ask yourself if that's strength speaking or pride in disguise. Remember Lincoln, who led with humility and wisdom, fully aware that even the strongest men need others to stand tall. 5. I'm too old for that. One of the most damaging lies a man can tell himself is, "I'm too old for that." This phrase slips out quietly, sometimes disguised as practicality or even self-deprecating humor. Yet underneath, it carries something far heavier. A resignation, a belief that the best chapters of our lives are already written, leaving little worth pursuing. This mindset doesn't merely limit us, it becomes toxic, quietly eroding our purpose and subtly persuading us to surrender a life that still holds so much potential. I once read about a man named Harry Bernstein. At 93 years old, after a lifetime of working as a magazine editor and raising a family, Harry decided to write his first book. He titled it The Invisible Wall, a memoir detailing his childhood in a poor English town divided by religion and prejudice. Several publishers rejected his manuscript. Nevertheless, Harry persisted, and the book was finally published when he was 96 years old. The Invisible Wall achieved international acclaim, translated into multiple languages, touching countless lives worldwide. Remarkably, Harry went on to write 3 more books after that. What struck me most about Harry's story wasn't merely his success, it was his courage. The courage to believe that life still had more to offer him, even in his 90s. Harry refused to buy into the lie that he was too old, or that it was too late. He knew he had something valuable to say, something significant to create, and so he did. This courage isn't exclusive to extraordinary individuals like Harry. It's a choice each of us faces daily. Do we listen to the voice whispering that we've missed our chance, or do we embrace the possibility that as long as we have breath, we have purpose? Stoics taught us clearly, age means nothing to the soul. Marcus Aurelius frequently reflected on this, reminding himself that while death is inevitable, our duty until that moment arrives is to live fully and virtuously. He believed wisdom often comes with age, not simply because years pass, but because those who remain curious and courageous continuously deepen their understanding. Growth doesn't halt with age, it ripens. I've seen men in their 60s master new skills, launch businesses, and mentor young leaders. Conversely, I've observed others who allowed regret and age to justify their withdrawal from life's challenges. The difference isn't circumstance, it's mindset. A man who declares, "I'm too old for that," has already closed the door. In contrast, the man who asks, "What can I do now?" opens that door wide. Age doesn't disqualify us from bold living. Instead, it enriches our offerings. Experience, clarity, and resilience. These aren't signs of someone who is finished. They're the tools of someone just getting started. This is the Stoic path. Keep learning, keep striving until your very last breath. As long as we're here, there's still meaningful work to be done. If what you've just heard resonates, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe, because every time I uncover a fresh perspective on life, I want you to be the first to hear it. 6. I'll do it later. There are few phrases more seductive and yet more destructive than "I'll do it later." It sounds harmless, rational even, a promise to ourselves that we'll eventually get around to doing what matters. But the truth is, later becomes the graveyard where most of our best intentions quietly die. Wise men deeply understand this. Many have learned the hard way that delaying important actions doesn't buy us time, it robs us of it. Each time we say we'll call tomorrow, apologize next week, or start a project when things settle down, we're gambling with something we cannot control: time. I once knew a man named Thomas. By every measure, he was successful. A thriving business, a beautiful family, respected in his community. But Thomas was always busy, too busy. He repeatedly promised himself he'd spend more time with his aging father later, when work wasn't so demanding. He postponed their planned fishing trips, delayed calls, and continually pushed back visits just to sit and talk. Then one day, later ran out. His father passed away suddenly, leaving Thomas with a phone full of unsent drafts and a heart filled with words he never said. Thomas shared this with me years afterward, not for sympathy, but as a warning. We always think we have more time, until suddenly we don't. The Stoics were acutely aware of this reality. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of his own mortality, not as a morbid exercise, but to sharpen his sense of urgency. He wrote clearly, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think. This isn't simply a philosophical thought experiment. It's a practical mindset intelligent men adopt, because they recognize time isn't in their hands. Time doesn't wait for our convenience or plans. It doesn't care about our intentions. What we delay today, we might never get the chance to do tomorrow. Wise men, therefore, act now. They make the phone call they've been avoiding. They take that first uncomfortable step toward mending broken relationships. They start the project gathering dust in the corner of their minds. Not because it's easy, but because they understand waiting for the perfect moment is a dangerous game that rarely pays off. I've personally experienced this. There were conversations I avoided because of discomfort and letters I didn't write, believing there would always be more time. But when I finally acted instead of delaying, something powerful happened. The weight lifted, clarity replaced regret. And I understood deeply that action, not intention, is what builds a meaningful life. The Stoics urge us to live fully now, with urgency and purpose. Later is an illusion, comforting perhaps, until it's suddenly too late. The man who acts today, refusing to leave important things undone, lives without regret. And that is true wisdom, because opportunity rarely knocks twice. It quietly fades while we're busy waiting for a better time. 7. That's just how I am. One of the most limiting beliefs a man can hold on to is summed up in the phrase, "That's just how I am." It sounds definitive, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. But what it truly signals is quiet surrender, a decision to stop growing. Intelligent men avoid this mindset because they understand a fundamental truth many ignore. We aren't fixed beings trapped by old habits or past identities. Who we are is continually shaped by what we choose to do, over and over again. The moment a man declares himself incapable of change, he isn't defining his nature. He's refusing responsibility for it. I've seen this scenario play out far too often. A man frequently loses his temper and, when confronted, simply shrugs, saying, "That's just how I am." Another man avoids meaningful connections because vulnerability makes him uncomfortable, convincing himself, "That's just who I've always been." These aren't factual statements, they're excuses. Excuses that allow fear and inertia to masquerade as self-awareness. Deep down, they reveal resistance to discomfort, resistance to the difficult process of change, and resistance to the reality that no man is finished becoming who he's meant to be. Stoics confronted this directly. They taught us we're not prisoners of our temperament, our past, or our impulses. Epictetus clearly stated, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Similarly, it's not our nature that limits us. It's the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Change is inherently uncomfortable. It requires honest self-examination and a willingness to release familiar patterns, even when those patterns have become sources of pain. Stoics believe self-mastery was the highest calling, not because it's easy, but because it's essential for a meaningful life. Growth demands honesty. It requires asking ourselves tough questions like, am I acting this way because it's truly who I am, or simply because it's easier than doing the work to change? Intelligent men choose the harder path. They recognize wisdom isn't a trophy earned and displayed. Wisdom is a practice, a daily commitment to becoming a better version of oneself. Not because they dislike who they are now, but because they respect themselves enough not to stay the same. Ultimately, saying, "That's just how I am," closes the door on possibility. Stoics remind us life itself is change. Nature itself is change. To resist it is to deny the very essence of being alive. The man who understands this truth doesn't fear change. He welcomes it. He sees himself as a work in progress, unfinished yet willing. And in that willingness lies true wisdom. If you've ever caught yourself saying one of these 7 phrases, trust me, you're in good company. I've been there too, more times than I'd like to admit. But here's the good news. Intelligent men aren't those who never make mistakes. They're those who recognize them and choose to do better. And that's exactly what we're doing here, becoming better, one thoughtful choice at a time. So which phrase resonated most deeply with you today? Maybe it's finally time to leave "that's just how I am" in the past. Or perhaps it's time to retire. "I'll do it later" before later becomes never. Whatever it is, this is your invitation to take the next step forward. Because wisdom isn't about perfection. It's about staying curious, humble, and always moving forward. If today's conversation sparked something within you, pass it on. Share this video with a friend who's walking the same path. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next video. Reflect on this deeply. True strength is not about having the last word or proving yourself right. It's about knowing when to listen, when to learn, and when to let wisdom shape your path. An intelligent man doesn't react hastily. He responds thoughtfully because he knows his words can build or destroy more than he realizes. Have you ever caught yourself dismissively saying, "I already know that"? Years ago, I worked with a mentor, a man whose quiet confidence and sparse words spoke volumes. We reviewed a procedure I had performed countless times. Without thinking, I interrupted him, confidently stating, "Yeah, I know that already." He simply looked at me, calm, heavy, and moved on. That evening, I realized my mistake wasn't just interrupting him. I'd robbed myself of invaluable insight. His years of experience had taught him nuances you don't find in manuals or training videos, wisdom I was too young to fully grasp. When we declare, "I already know that," what we're really saying is, "There's nothing left for me to learn." That isn't intelligence, it's arrogance disguised as competence. Stoicism confronts this directly. Marcus Aurelius cautioned, "You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything." Our ego, the desire to appear knowledgeable, often becomes the greatest barrier to genuine growth, convincing us we're standing on solid ground when we're actually balancing precariously on pride. Intelligent men understand knowledge isn't a trophy to display on a shelf. It's a flowing river, continually fresh and ever-changing. Each time we step in, the waters are different. I once observed an experienced carpenter patiently listening as an apprentice described a technique he'd mastered decades earlier. He nodded respectfully, asked questions, and genuinely thanked the apprentice afterward. Curious, I asked why he hadn't simply said he knew all that already. Smiling, he replied, "Sometimes you learn more by listening to how someone else sees things." That's true wisdom, the kind of intelligence that needs no broadcasting. Next time you find yourself thinking, "I've heard this before," pause. Listen anyway, not merely to humor someone, but because you might discover something new, a subtle detail, a different perspective, or a nuance deepening your understanding. Even if you don't gain new knowledge, you'll practice humility and demonstrate respect. Qualities that, over time, make you someone worth listening to. In Stoicism, we call this mastery of the self, the capacity to set aside pride in favor of clarity and to remain a lifelong student. In the end, that's the intelligence that endures above all else.